Hi, I want to give you 10 tips on how to write a good essay at university. The first tip is about reading the instructions. You always need to make sure that you read the instructions for the essay carefully. In fact, I would suggest to read the instructions for the essay at least 3 times. Look at things such as what's the word count? What is the exact question? What's the purpose? That is, what does the professor want or what does the professor act? Try to imagine to be the professor. What do you think they're after? And put that in the context, of course, of what you've learned in the lectures. One thing that I have noticed marking essays is that students often are good in describing what I have learned, but that is that they might fail on actually addressing a specific question that's being asked. And that actually is, in order to get the best possible mark, is quite important. So look for that. And reading the instructions several times just makes you fully aware of what's being asked. Now I'll give you 2 examples here. Imagine you get this question. Critically evaluate sex differences in personality. Now, I highlight here the critically evaluate. That is actually a phrase you see a lot in UK universities. What it means is that you just should not just describe what you know about sex differences in personality, and this would be sort of like a topic in psychology, but you need to go beyond that. For example, relate different theories to one another, maybe say where there are clashes between different theorists, maybe say how insights have changed over time. Sometimes you get a question like this, for example, just describe the effect of education on intelligence. The reason I give this specific example here is that there is actually something that you really need to look at in this question. The question is not for you not to just write everything you know about education and intelligence. The effect of education on intelligence. So there's clearly the purpose behind the question is to address or to hear what the student knows about the specific causal effects of education on intelligence and not the other way around. So just say, for example, that people with higher intelligence do better in school in and of itself is not necessarily addressing that specific causal relation here. So again, that is a good example of reading the question really carefully. What are they after? What do they want to know from you? The second tip is about writing about what you learned in the lectures. What I sometimes see is that students do not do that, but they show that they've read more, which is good. So if you write about things that you have not learned in the lectures, write about it, that's good, right? So you should also show that you've read beyond what you've learned in the lectures. Where I see sometimes a strange situation that students seem to write about what they've read about a topic, but hardly or not at all refer to what they have learned in the lectures. And I think, there is a reason that the professor has taught about certain theories and papers in the lectures. So I think if you want to do better, you most likely should refer to that. The third tip is to check if the professor's research can be cited. Now, I'm not saying here that you per se need to do that. Sometimes a professor has not at all done research on the topic he or she was teaching about. But on the other hand, there are professors who teach specifically about a topic that is close to their own research, and they might have done research. And if that is the case, that research can give you clues on the sort of thing that the professor is actually looking for in your essay. I mean, obviously, all researchers, all professors, they are specialized in certain areas, and it's very likely that they might focus on something that they have done research on. So Not citing it might actually mean that you forget an important theory in the field. So it's not always the case, but if it is the case that a professor has done research in that area, which is not unlikely, you know, it might make sense to cite that. I mean, not always, but just think about it. That's my tip. Tip 4 is to have a good structure, and this is really more broadly about writing your essay. Um, I think you need to have a good beginning, a main part, a conclusion, and not always, but in if you know that there are references expected in your essay, put them in. Um, a beginning should really maybe rephrase the question. I think that's not a bad thing because it helps you to focus and reflect on what the actual question is. And in a conclusion, I think you should try to maybe also summarize the main point of your insights or the main points on how you answer a certain question or how you address a question. And for references, I would also suggest to make sure that you refer to original academic studies rather than textbooks. So I don't see it so often, but sometimes you see that you have a student who writes an essay about a certain topic and keeps referring to the main textbook, which covers everything about a certain topic, and that's not a very specific reference. It's probably not necessarily bad, but it depends on the context you do that in. But I would actually think that it's better if you can say, well, the research that is actually also mentioned in the textbook, actually this is the original research, right? Because the textbook will refer to the original research, and I think that's your best bet. um, Tip 5 is uh, to check recent literature. So the focus here is on recent. If you look for a topic on Google Scholar, for example, which is a free to use and very good search engine for academic literature, if research, say, on personality, sex differences in personality is really old, that might come at the top because it has been cited most. But if you only cite really old research in your essay on a certain topic that's still research, the people who mark it might think, well, why does the student not also mention recent developments in the academic field? I would say, and you might ask, oh, what is recent research? Well, it doesn't need to be of the past year, but maybe something from the past 4 years. That's a good general rule of thumb. The next tip is it's about language use. Try to use academic language. That means try to be concise. So that's a concise writing means don't use unnecessary words. A good book on this is Strunkenwag's Elements of Style. You can get it for little money. You can look up in the bookstore. It's a really good and really thin book as well, which lots of really handy tips on how to write concisely. Be precise. So if with that in part means that if you make a statement, say where it comes from and what exactly do you mean. Don't be vague, and don't use everyday language. Of course, the language that you use is also used in everyday language, but sometimes there are words that you only would use when you speak to your friends. It's what we call colloquial. Well, academic language is often slightly different. Sometimes we have different ways of referring to certain people and so on. So do that properly. The next tip is to give definitions of important concepts that you use. So, for example, if you write an answer about, as we saw in the example before, describe sex differences in personality, maybe it makes sense, I would say, to say, well, what exactly do we mean with sex differences? that can be really short, but that is clear what you mean with it. And also, what do you mean with personality? That is because the nice thing with that is, depending on your word count, this is an opportunity for you to show to the professor, this is, I know this, I know these things, I understand the topic that I'm being assessed on here. The next step is checking if your essay is logically coherent. Do you maybe contradict yourself? And is there a clear line of thought and argument? I mean, sometimes you see it in essays that, people say one thing and then they say something completely different. And you wonder, why is that actually? The student or the writer seems to contradict herself or himself. So rereading your essay several times before you submit it is a good idea, because then you probably would see it. Now, another issue, and this is probably highly relevant for fields, in the social sciences. I would say, do not mix in your own political or social views, because ultimately, unless you're being asked to do so, but if not, do not just say one thing, because ultimately scientific writing is sort of like, should be value free. And you can, of course, in certain contexts, you can give political views or social views, but then you might say, well, some people think this and other people think that, rather than just saying, oh, this is good or that's bad. Okay, the final tip is about spell checking. So spell checkers, why do I even have to say that? Well, you still see that people make spelling mistakes. One way, actually, apart from using a spell checker, a good way to find mistakes is actually to read the text out aloud for yourself, because then actually sometimes you say, hey, that's a funny sentence. You might just miss it when you read it, but when you speak it out, if you want to go to an extreme, what you could do is you could record yourself. You read it out aloud, you record it, and then you listen back to it. Does it make sense? And that's probably then a good time to tweak. Well, I hope these 10 tips were helpful. If you like this video, please like and subscribe to this channel.